Welcome back to Just a Dude podcast, where we dive deep into the conversations that matter to everyday folks like you and me. I'm your host, Nathan, and today we're venturing into the world of political innovation with a party that's all about solutions rather than sides. So buckle up because we're about to explore new horizons in American politics. Let's get into it. Joining me today is Evan Jaqua, a passionate advocate for political reform who's been diving into the nitty gritty of the Solutions Party, a group that's challenging the status quo by focusing on problem solving over partisanship. Evan, thanks for being here to help us unpack how this party aims to make America greater than ever. And thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much, Nathan. I'm honored to be here, and I'm looking forward to having a great conversation and hopefully something that your listeners will find interesting. So, just to give you a little bit of background, I've spent most of my life actually overseas. Lived in Japan for many years. I actually got my master's degree in Japan, and actually wrote my thesis in Japanese.
Wow.
Yeah, in computer science, and I actually worked in the AI field when it was just getting started many years ago. And so if we ever want to do a podcast on AI, we can do that too.
Yeah, because I work in AI myself too, Evan. So
Great.
yeah, I know exactly.
Well, that's great.
I probably don't have the smarts that you do, but I'm a scrum master for my AI teams.
Well, that's wonderful. And then I also lived in China for a while. I was married to a Chinese woman, and we lived in Beijing not too long after Tiananmen Square. And
Yeah.
it was a very interesting experience because it was still very much, you could see the Maoist influence in China. And their family had suffered terribly under communism and the Cultural Revolution in particular. And I've spent most of the last 20 years or so in South America. And so I've had a real rich set of experiences in my life, and I've had the chance to talk to a lot of people who've had also a range of experiences. And the Solutions Party is really kind of a summary of these different ideas that I've heard from around the world. And, what's really interesting is how much we all have in common when it comes to the problems that we face and what we all desire. We all desire freedom and prosperity. And, the question is it impossible for us to come up with a country that's opportunity rich, an economy that's opportunity rich, and we enjoy greater freedom? And I don't believe so. And, Ronald Reagan said, government is not the problem, it's the solution. But I would actually refine that a little bit and say the problem is our politicians.
Yes.
And what is the problem with our politicians? Well, let's start off talking a little bit about the human brain. The human brain is a marvelous thing, but one of its weaknesses is the ease with which it forms addictions. We form addictions to gambling, we form addictions to drinking, to drug taking, to social media, you name it. But probably the most addictive thing of all, and I think history has made this self-evident, is power.
Yeah.
People get addicted to power and they don't want to give it up. Now, you have extreme cases like the Syrian dictator or the former Syrian dictator who would drop barrel bombs on innocent people to stay in power, or the North Korean dictator who will send entire families to gruesome prison camps where they'll be tortured to death to stay in power, or dictators who will poison their opponents, their political opponents, or jail their political opponents and invade neighboring countries. And these people do so because they get a vicious addiction to power. Now, our politicians are also susceptible to this.
Yes.
And as George Will, the conservative Pulitzer-winning columnist, said, there's not a dime's worth of difference between Democrats and Republican in that their first priority is staying in office. As John Boehner, the former Speaker of the House, said, you give people a little power, and it's scary how much it transforms them. And you wonder why it transforms them? It's like if you've ever known somebody who's gotten hopelessly addicted to alcohol, you see how it changes them terribly. If you've ever seen anybody or known anybody who's hopelessly addicted to drugs, you see it changes them terribly. And it also, I like to say, addictions kind of make you stupid. And that's a strong way to put it, because the addiction becomes the priority.
Right.
The addiction becomes the priority. And so when people say, gosh, our politicians are a bunch of idiots, they're actually not that wrong, because, when you are making your priority satisfying your addiction, you do pretty dumb things.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I were a doctor, Nathan, and I had to prescribe to you a very addictive medication. How would we ensure that you didn't get addicted to it? Well, we would give you small doses spread apart. And that's exactly how power has to be allocated. Small doses spread apart. Because the minute you get re-election in there, that's going to become the priority. Why is our Congress a lapdog to the executive branch, whether it's Democrat or Republican? Because everybody is afraid of being primaried.
Yes. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And Evan, that's a great point because we see that with our politicians. As soon as they get elected, 2 days later, probably less than that, they're already running for reelection.
Yes, exactly. They spend half their time at least just in campaign mode, raising money for their next campaign or attending political events. Literally, if you hired somebody for a 4-year contract and they spent half their time on the job just playing politics to get their contract extended in 4 years, you probably wouldn't be too happy with their performance. So why do we tolerate that? Well, the only way to solve this is power has to be allocated in one-time segments. And not only that, and see, this is where a lot of people talk about term limits. But as the great Thomas Sowell said, there's an article I actually quote. He was a great conservative African-American. But he said that, and this is something that, after many years of talking with on the subject with many people, is that you can't have reelection even once because that will always become the priority. And so not only that, what we advocate is one term. And not only that, you cannot run for another office while you're in your current office, because for one thing, you're not going to be able to be allowed to run for office until 2 years after your term ends. And not only that, you can never run for the same office again. So the idea is you go in there and you work. You're given one chance to make your mark on history. You're given one chance to make a difference. And what are you going to do with that one chance? You're given every incentive to work, full time to implement the ideas that your voters, your constituents
to get
have
results.
Endorsed.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
To get results. Exactly. And the thing is that, how many times have you heard this politician is not up for re-election so they can vote their conscience? And it's like, you step back and you think, well, why aren't they voting their conscience all the time? Why is it the first question is, how do I vote to ensure that I get reelected? It's like right now, you hear whisperings that a lot of Republican congressmen are very uneasy with what Trump is doing, and vice versa when Biden was in office.
Right.
But why don't they publicly come out and stake a stand? Is because they're worried about being primary.
They're worried about their constituents and making them mad and not reelecting them. Exactly. You're actually,
exactly.
And you're absolutely right, because we've seen it so many times. I mean, look at the career politicians that we have in office. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer. Oh, what's the Republican that's going to retire? Mitch McConnell. Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, they've been in there for lifetimes, literally lifetimes.
And, the thing is also what's very disturbing. If you look at the statistics, incumbents, have like a 95% chance of being reelected. Now, it's because, they have the name recognition, they have the party support, they have the special interest support. And by the way, the relationship between the special interests and the politicians is kind of very similar to the relationship between a drug dealer and the addict.
You're absolutely right. They're pushing the need, right? You need to be elected. I'm going to give you the money to do that, but you got to give me a little something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what are the special interests? They give money directly through soft money. They spread misinformation about themselves or about, they make the razzle dazzle marketing campaign on one hand and stupid attack ads on the other. But probably their biggest weapon, in collaboration with the politicians themselves and the political infotainment, is they create culture wars. Now, culture wars, why are culture wars so appealing to politicians? Because you have tribalism. And that means that these people are going to vote for you blindly. They're not going to even consider the other side. So look how that's affected our presidential elections. Why is it that 3 counties outside of Milwaukee matter more than all of California? Why is it that 3 counties outside of Atlanta matter more than all of Texas? Why is it that 3 counties outside of Phoenix matter more than all of New York? It comes down to a handful of counties in a handful of purple states mattering more than anything. But politicians love that because their work comes down to just convincing this small, undecided minority to vote one way or the other. Now, you see, from my point of view, Donald Trump should have been looking for votes in every corner of California.
Mm-hmm.
Kamala Harris should have been looking for votes in every corner of Texas. They should be fighting for votes nationwide,
Right.
not just in a few counties. But this is the result of when you have tribalization, and tribalization happens when you have culture war. Culture wars happen when our differences go tribal. In other words, we can't talk because people are just so emotionally vested. So,
Yeah, it's I'm right and you're wrong. Is
exactly.
basically what it
They're
comes
just
down to.
talking
Yep.
past each other. And what I like to call, you're familiar with black holes in outer space?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, what I like to say, there's sort of an analogy. A black hole, there's an event horizon. And if you go past that event horizon, you cross that event horizon, there's no point of you returning. Well, what I call is the fanatic event horizon, the point at which your emotional investment in something is so great that it's very small, very unlikely you're going to return to reality-based thinking. And this is the result when our politics have devolved into a circus of emotion manipulation and
Yes.
lies, as opposed to what our democracy should be, which is a competition of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Our greatest strength as a country is diversity of ideas. I've seen countries like China where only one idea is allowed.
Yeah,
A
right.
Chinese individual told me once that one of the greatest things about living in America is the freedom of thought. Well, that's our greatest strength. So let's get the emotions out of there. Let's get the lies out of there. Let's focus on the ideas. Let's focus on discussing those ideas. And just one other thing I want to say. People have always disagreed, and people will always disagree. The question is how you deal with those disagreements. Throughout history, the way to disagree, the people handle disagreements, well, they sharpen the swords, they sharpen the spears, and they went at it. And the
Yep.
best band of brawlers won until we eventually figured out that wasn't the really best way to move things forward.
No.
We're always going to disagree. The point is how we handle those disagreements. And so if we get the emotions out, we focus on the ideas because they're good ideas across the political spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
The solutions party is not right or left. It's about encouraging a free flow of ideas, an honest discussion of ideas. And so that's probably, in a very big nutshell, what we're all about.
And Evan, it's great that you bring that up because one of the issues that I see today, one of our biggest issues as Americans, as citizens of the United States, is the fact that we've become so polarized to say that no matter what subject we're on, it's either like we talked about before, I'm either right and you're wrong, or vice versa. But I even remember, when I was younger, even with the left and the right, the two-party system, they at least could find some common ground to get
Yes,
things done.
exactly.
But we don't get
Exactly.
anything done anymore.
No, let me give you two examples of that. When I was a teenager, I used to work in rural Utah. I was helping delivering bread and soda pop to rural markets.
Mm-hmm.
This was 1976. I was still in high school. We could talk to people about we could have a conversation about, are you going to vote for President Ford or Jimmy Carter? And there wasn't this vicious,
Yeah.
reaction. It's like, you're voting for him.
Exactly.
It's just, people would have these discussions and respect each other. And then the other story I want to tell you is I went to a small liberal arts college, and it was liberal in every sense of the word. Now, I was a young Republican.
Mm-hmm.
I had just voted for Proposition 13 in California, which is a property tax initiative. I was pro-capitalist, I was free markets. I was anti-Soviet. And I can tell you, I got into a lot of emotionally charged discussions with my classmates and
Sure.
my university, the people I knew at the university. But I can tell you this, that after all of the heated arguing, after all of the intense debating, after all the points and counterpoints have been made, we could still go and have dinner together. We could still go lunch together. We could study together, laugh together, go get coffee together. Because even though we disagreed, we all knew that everybody else had the best interests in heart. We all wanted the same thing: more freedom, more prosperity. We had different ideas how to achieve, but you know what? That's the good news. We have ideas. Let's listen to the ideas. Let's choose the best ones, vote on them, and move forward. And if the idea doesn't work out, we'll try another idea. But that makes us a far more superior form of government than the alternative, which is autocracies and totalitarianism, where you have a strongman or you have a small group of elites or religious leaders dictating how people are going to think and what they're going to study and what they're going to learn and how they're going to act. So our system, if we get the emotions and the lies out of it, prosperity and freedom will come.
Yes.
But it starts by getting our power-addicted politicians, we got to put them on a short leash.
Yeah, I mean, really, you're right, because the more power, the more leeway we give them, the further they go, and the further they seem to divide the country as well.
Yes, they actually benefit from all of this division. And like I say, it's wonderful if you already have 45% of the population is just going to automatically vote for you. You don't have to, you only have to work for that small, ever smaller sliver of voters. So let's get the emotions out of the picture. Let's focus. And to do that, we suggested on our website a number of ways, things that we need to do, what we feel we need to do, because this is a multifaceted issue, multifaceted challenge we face in our country, and we need multifaceted solutions. And that, first of all, let's get rid of career politicians, one term. Let's reform our political parties, because our political parties have gone too tribal. Now,
yeah, you're absolutely right on that. And I mean, I just saw something yesterday. I think it was the approval rating of the Democratic Party was down to 26%.
Yeah,
and I was like, wow, it's like that's terrible.
But neither one of our political parties. Now, the problem is this. George Washington warned against political parties.
He did.
Said they become institutions through which corrupt individuals will enrich themselves and will compromise the country out of their own greed for power.
Yep.
I mean, I'm just summarizing very briefly. But on the other hand, political parties can serve a purpose, because they can be vehicles through which people of similar ideas organize and offer candidates accordingly. So what we want is the best of both worlds, where we have political parties that can be the vehicles for people to organize, through which people organize, but we don't want them to go tribal. So the way you do that is you put a 12-year limit, or whatever, however long limit, on how long a political party can exist.
Okay. So you're not even talking about basically kind of the idea of blowing up the political parties, start new ones, but exactly. 12 years and that's it. And then you've got to either reform a new party or...
Yes. And you put a condition that the leaders of the previous party cannot be the leaders of the new party.
I love that.
And the thing is that this will allow us to have political parties to organize, for people who of similar ideas to organize. But before, let me just back up. The famous historian Carroll Quigley wrote a book called The Evolution of Civilizations. And he said, and this is very true, that organizations become institutionalized. And that means they start to take on a life of their own, and where the priorities of the institution become the priorities. In other words, let's take a few examples. The Communist Party, which is kind of an extreme example, was set up to empower workers. And what did it end up becoming? A cult-like vehicle to empower and enrich the leaders. If you look at university sports, for example, the sports at colleges and universities was set up to give kids or, students chances to exercise, blow off steam, but it becomes this independent money-making vehicle completely apart from the university.
It is. And it's not what it was originally intended for. And now it's almost like a semi-professional sport.
Exactly. Yes. Or look at, organized religion. Churches were set up to help people, understand or, come to, feel some resonance with the spirituality, and hearing, somebody talk about, who supposedly knows something about these things, talk about faith. But they end up becoming organizations that become greedy and that look out for themselves. And we see this. So organizations become institutionalized. And this is what happens to our political parties. We get a party first mentality, where the priorities of the party matter more than the priorities of the
people. Yeah, of the people, really. And the political parties are supposed to be here to take care of the people, just like the government is supposed to take care of the people, not the people, the government. Right? I mean, the government should answer to us. And quite frankly, it's going the other way around. We answer to them. And the whole idea of our Constitution now kind of has an idea where it's definitely not what it's intended, because you probably feel it. I know I feel it, that a politician is supposed to be someone who represents the people. But in most cases, we're seeing them represent their own, whatever their own viewpoints are, or their constituents, as far as, and I don't mean constituents like voters. They're we just talked about them.
They're clients.
Exactly. They're clients that are going to get them that next reelection. And that's something that we as voters, just like myself, I wish, and this we'll go into, because I have some things here, because I want to go into a little bit more depth of your party. But I've often had the idea that I would love to just wipe out, and let me say this in a way, get rid of all the politicians that we have today and basically say, listen, if you've ever been a politician before, you can't run for office.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
we're going to start
Yes.
from scratch because you guys have messed it up way too much. And this is a
Right.
country that was never supposed to be a two-party system, is my
Right.
belief.
Right.
We were all supposed to be collectively individuals voting for, if you look at I think, what is it, Article 2 or whatever talks about the election of the president, it's supposed to be a national election of some, presidential people, not necessarily related to a party. So there could be 40 candidates,
Right. Right.
and that's what it's
Yeah.
supposed to be. But yeah, it's definitely changed from that.
Yeah, yeah, it has. And, in fact, William Buckley, the famous conservative, he said once, and I'm not quoting exactly, but he said um, he'd rather have in Washington 2,000 people randomly selected from the Boston phone book than
Yes,
2,000 career politicians. And, that's
absolutely.
exactly how we want our Congress and our elected, we don't want our elected representatives to be a mosaic of our own country. We want to have the school teacher from Wyoming, the truck driver from New Mexico, the small business owner from Florida, the doctor from New York. Instead of a rich lawyers club,
Yeah, that's what it is.
yes, we want to have our Congress be a mosaic of
Of
different
us.
professions, different
Yeah.
experiences, different genders,
Different ethnic
careers.
background, everything.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
We are a melting pot of a country, and our elected officials should represent.
Exactly. It should be a cross section of us as a society, and not like a bunch of rich
And
lawyers.
and that's really what it's become, right? Evan is just a bunch of
Yes.
rich elites that have enough money.
Yes.
Because think about it. I don't know if you have, but I know in myself, I get into politics quite a bit and I enjoy it. And I think it's great to do things, but I'm a regular person. I could never afford to run for office. That's
Yeah.
another issue right there is you got to have so much money to run for office.
Right.
Really a normal everyday person just can't afford to do so.
I completely agree, and I think that needs to be addressed because, as you say, it's basically if you don't have the money, how can you possibly run
Exactly.
for office? And so, yeah, I think that we really need actually, those are some ideas. I have some ideas that I hope to put on the website regarding that to open this up to, ordinary citizens. One of the ideas, by the way, is, for example, and this is kind of, I haven't actually thought this through thoroughly, but is, for example, let's say we have 435 congressional seats to fill. What if we had just 10% of those, in a given district? The districts would change from election to election. Actually, you just randomly select somebody who's registered and who's shown that they passed a test or so. So you actually have like just a random 10% that are assigned, not from the same district every time, but you just get sort of a variability in there so that, if you want to run, and what you do is you register, you show that you've got some, what your ideas are, whatever, that you've thought some of this stuff through, and that you've got some knowledge, maybe take a test of some sort, an application, and you get your name on a list. And in this one election, in this particular district, the winner will be randomly selected from this list. And so we get a percentage of our politicians, just
Yeah.
sort of randomly
Randomly.
selected.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that would introduce, what do I want to say? What I say, a positive unknown.
Yeah,
If
and
you,
it,
if
it
you
really gives someone an opportunity then to say, "Hey, I'd love to run for politics. I don't really have the money, but hey, I could get my name on this list and maybe get a shot."
Yes, yeah, and then that way, I just think it would, like I say, there's something to be said for having this random element in there, and so you could have it so that the voters in that district could vote on maybe on the party that they want to have
Hmm.
represented. Maybe you could have two. Like I say, we'd have these new parties, and one party A, party B, and if they vote for party A, then somebody would be randomly selected from the A list to
Gotcha.
so
I
that the
like that.
voters would have some,
Still have some
we
say
want
in it, but
we want somebody from party A. If the voters say, okay, we're gonna, and then from this list of A list candidates, that one person will be just randomly selected, and they will only serve one term,
yep.
and
Yeah,
so
and
they're gonna, yeah,
No, and that's where I wanted to go next, Evan. I wanted to hit some of the key proposals that you guys have in the Solutions
Hmm.
Party,
Hmm.
and if I can, I'm going to go through them, just a few that I jotted down. So the
Sure.
first one is no reelection. So can you
Yes.
explain the concept of that and why it's proposed?
Okay, well, the biggest reason is because, as I say, the most severe problem we have in our country, and I think this is actually a worldwide problem, is that power is very addictive, and once you give somebody power, they don't want to give it up, and that becomes the priority. Just like somebody who gets addicted to a drug, or gets addicted to gambling, or gets addicted to video games, or whatever, that becomes the dominant priority in their life. In my family, we've had some terrible alcohol ism problems. And, you see that what happens to people when the addiction becomes the priority. And this is what happens with our politicians. And plus the partisan pressures, you have
Yeah.
to go along to get along type of thing. If some politician, like we saw recently, one representative from Kentucky voted against the continuing resolution.
Hmm.
Oh, there's already this, well, let's primary them.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, because you saw it too. I think it was what Senator Fetterman did the same thing. Everybody was
Yeah,
saying, no, the
yeah,
Democrats shouldn't vote for the CR. And he's like, listen, I know it's probably not the best, but I want to keep the government open so that we could keep providing
yeah,
services. And I'm like,
yeah.
when he said that, I was actually like, regardless of my political view, I'm like, here's someone who is truly trying to put the people first.
Exactly, exactly. And now the good news is if there's no reelection, there's no primary. So you
Yep.
don't have to worry about that.
You can
So
focus on your job.
exactly. And do what you think is right instead of what you think is politically expedient. Because right now, if a politician has to choose between doing what they think is right or doing what they think is politically expedient, guess what they're going to choose?
Yes, exactly. Especially if they can go up for reelection, right? Because
Yeah,
like I
yeah.
and I use that for a perfect example. If you look at what President Trump has done so far
Hmm.
this term, I mean, he's
Hmm.
just come in the office just flying, right? I mean, he's all
Right,
these executive orders and things. And why is he doing that? Because he doesn't have to run for reelection again. Right. He
right,
knows he doesn't, he
right,
obviously there's his base that he has to
right.
appease, because
Yeah,
if he wants to continue on his movement through another election, right, he's got to do a little bit of that. But for the most part, there's nothing holding him back now. There's no other
yeah,
election, if you
yeah.
think about it. And, I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing, but it shows you that you can start working on what you think. If you don't have to
Right,
worry about a reelection, you can actually do what
right.
you think is important. Now, I'm not saying whether what Trump is doing is
Yeah,
right or wrong. It's an
right.
example.
Well, the only
He's
thing I would comment that on, though, he is being pressured by his congressional allies to
yeah.
not do something that's going to screw up their reelection.
Yes. Yeah. And
So,
that's always a big concern, right? From that
yes,
side. But
yes, and if and the thing is, politicians are such that let's look at Lindsey Graham. He
mhm,
was against Trump, then he was for Trump. He
yeah.
was against Trump, then he's for Trump. And these people, they just bend whichever way the political wind is blowing. I think we want people who've got principles, who've
Yeah.
got,
Stand by their convictions.
yeah, stand by their convictions and not just doing what's politically expedient. And
Exactly.
so,
And I mean, I'm not saying that people don't have the right to change their mind because obviously you do, right?
right. Yeah.
But exactly, you shouldn't change your mind every 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. And doing so based on what you think is popular.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong exactly with, when you see the evidence, you have a position on something and then you see the evidence. Like some people, like Mike Johnson, the House Speaker last year, uh, he changed his opinion regarding Ukraine. He was against funding, but once he heard the intelligence
Yeah.
analysis,
The briefings and stuff. Yep.
the briefings, he realized what was at stake. And that's okay. That's
Yeah.
great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But, I think though that, so the whole point of the number one thing that we're proposing is, putting term limits, absolute term limits with no possibility of running for that office ever again. And you have to put there'll be a 2 year waiting period before you can run for another office. So if you served in Congress for a term, before you can run for Senate, you have to wait 2 years before you can
I
start running
love
for
that
Senate. Because
because
otherwise,
then the corruption starts, right? Because you
yeah,
can continue to get those I want to say kickbacks. All of our
yeah,
politicians are honest, right?
Yeah.
I think we know better when we can see that a politician's making less than $200,000 a year and has been in politics for their entire life and they're worth $50 million.
Yeah. Oh,
You know
exactly.
something's going on there.
Something's kind of, you got to smell a rat there.
Exactly. Like I'm not saying that everybody's dirty and maybe there was a legitimate reason, but if you don't sell
Right.
a product and you're worth millions of dollars on $150,000 salary a year,
Right.
it
Yeah.
raises eyebrows.
Right, exactly. And we don't want the sort of situation which we have, like, and I'm not going to, sorry for picking on Ron DeSantis, but I'll
That's
pick
all
on
right.
him anyway, is that, he's governor, but he's running for president. So what does that mean? That means almost everything he does is skewed to boosting his presidential aspirations.
You're
And
right.
but we don't want our politics. That's why you got to put a 2-year waiting period, because otherwise, if they can run for office while they're still in office, that will skew their decisions. That will skew their behavior. So you've got to have a waiting period. So that's the biggest thing,
So,
the political
and
reform.
Evan, for your party's base, is this just on federal level, or are you thinking across the board at all
No, I think this should be
political levels?
all. It should
So,
be.
city, county, state, federal,
Yes,
everything.
yes. Some people say, well, gosh, but don't we need experienced politicians? And you have to ask yourself, well, what are they experienced at? They're
Yeah,
experienced at being politicians.
that's it.
They're experienced at, putting their own political careers ahead of anything else. They're used at playing politics and putting their party's interests above everything else. They're experienced at spending more than half their time raising money for their next political campaign.
Yeah.
They're experienced at catering to special interests. They're experienced at never giving a clear answer. You ask them a simple question, and they sometimes they just don't answer the question. They answer a completely different question, or they give this vague, ambiguous question or answer that you could interpret any way you want.
Yeah, they just repeat it over and over and over again. Yep.
Yeah. So that's the kind of experience we don't need. And so I think that politics also should never be about a person or a personality. It should be about ideas. Let's not place people on pedestals, because people come and go. Let's place the ideas, the ideals, and the vision on the pedestal. And then when somebody's term comes to an end, if you liked how they worked, well, vote for somebody who promises
similar.
to carry on.
Exactly.
Who's going to carry on those ideas.
Yep.
Because it's about ideas. It's not about, if it's not Joe politician, well, we're cooked. It's never that. It's never about these people aren't somehow, certified political geniuses that, I mean, out of one out of a million.
I was even going to say that too, Evan. If you look at most of our politicians that are in, office, a lot of them are lawyers, right? Attorneys, right? They've had a lot of it, right? And of course, obviously, I'd want to have some, attorneys as lawmakers. I mean, that does make sense, right? A little bit. But where are the people that have run businesses, and where are the people that write code as an IT person that can understand programs that give us a full spectrum of what's going on? Because I can tell you right now, we can see by our national deficit that obviously none of them have taken a course in balancing budgets.
Well, yeah, not only that, a lot of them just don't seem to understand the difference between an investment and an expense.
Yes.
And now, I believe, make wise investments in our infrastructure. You make wise investments in our energy infrastructure, in our educational infrastructure, and those will pay back. But sometimes you get like jail. Jail, for example, is an expense.
It's an expense. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're keeping these people housed and you're feeding them, but you're probably not going to get anything for your investment.
Yeah, and I can say it too, Evan. I was a police officer for 13 years, and seeing people go into jail, just having people in jail doesn't help society. I mean, it gets them off the street, which is great because we don't want them reoffending. But what are we doing to these inmates? And this could be a topic for something else. But if you think about it, what are we doing to get these inmates, these people that have violated the law, to become productive members of society so that we can let them out one day?
Yes, exactly. Reforming them.
Absolutely.
So, and of course, recognizing, of course, that some people will never be reformed.
Some people won't. I mean, and that's just the way it is. We know that. But yeah. And then, so I did want to ask, so if we're talking about, no reelection, are we talking about the same term limits then as well that we have now? Or would you, is your party proposing that term time, so for Congress, 2 years, Senate 6, those types of things?
Well, I think, this is something I do want to write about. I think for the Congress, it should be 3 years. I think 3 years would be better because it's best. I think 2 years is just a little too short
Mm-hmm.
for one term. If you're
I
going to have
agree
one
with you.
term, yeah, yeah, I think it should be three. Senate 6 years, that seems pretty reasonable. President for maybe 5 years would be good, but just to give a little more time for them to accomplish what they have proposed to do. But maybe these minor adjustments, because Congress 2 years, especially the way we have now.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, by the time they get in, it takes them 2 years just to figure out how the thing works.
Yeah. Well, not only that, it means they're going to be in constant campaign mode.
Yep. Exactly.
Constant campaign. You see, I think that one term, they can be very effective.
Sure. Especially if they don't have to worry about reelection, right?
Exactly. So before they actually start their term, you give them a week-long seminar about how things work. Most people are going to be fine. Most of the people we elect, we're going to elect them because they've got great ideas. We are going to elect them because we feel that they've got the skills and the talent to advance those ideas. We're not going to vote dummies. People aren't going to vote for dummies, especially if we get the lies and the emotion manipulation out and have our politicians focusing on ideas. One of the things that I've been in sales quite a bit recently, and I've known salespeople since I've started working, and there are a range of different classes of salesmen. You've got first rate salespeople, and these are the people who know their product. They know their competition's product. They don't need to lie about their product. They don't need to lie about the competition's product because they've got the confidence in what they're offering, whether it's a product or a service. You have the other end of the spectrum, the fourth rate salespeople who will say anything to make the sale.
Yep. It's just a job. They're there to get that commission, right?
Yeah. They will say anything, and they will trash the competition and completely, I mean, look, if I go to a sales presentation and the salesperson says, can talk to us in an intelligent way and make the case why their product and service is good. They can even talk respectfully about the competition, but make the distinction. They don't have to lie about the competition. Yeah. That is somebody I will listen to. But if I go into a sales presentation and the guy is saying, "Oh, we're the greatest," our products are, and they're just a piece of junk, it's just crap. I just walk out because this guy is just saying anything. And unfortunately, our politicians are fourth-rate salespeople. They're the sort of people who will say anything to get reelected or to get elected. They're the ones who will lie about what the opponents stand for. I mean, on one hand, you have the people on the right saying the people on the left are communists, and on the left, you have the people saying the people on the right are fascists.
Yep, exactly. And you know what the truth is neither one is either probably close to that. I think we all want to be, but the problem is, like you said, we're always running for reelection, looking for that next vote. And that really stops people from doing the job we elected them to do.
Well, exactly. And the problem is that liars win election. As long as we reward liars by electing them into office, what incentive do they have?
None.
So one of the things we proposed is just like if I'm applying for a job with you, Nathan, and you catch me lying in the interview, you have every right to kick me out of the interview. If you hire me and you catch me lying on the job, you have every right to fire me. So why don't we hold the same standard to our politicians?
Yeah, there's no accountability whatsoever to our politicians.
Yeah, if they lie, it's even worse with politicians because they are asking to be entrusted with the sacred power of the people. If they lie to voters, then voters don't have the accurate information they need to make the decisions that are going to benefit them. And so lying during a campaign has to be thought of at least as bad as lying during a job interview. If they lie after they're in office, that has to be thought of at least as bad as lying if you're on the job. And there should be severe penalties. And we should be able to,
Yeah, I mean, any place you've ever worked, Evan, I'm sure you had a code of conduct with that employer, right? And they even tell you in that the lying is not, you can't do that. That's not something you should do. If you don't know, tell someone you don't know, but you shouldn't be spreading lies or misinformation. And, I would hope that Congress and the Senate has the same types of rules for themselves, but obviously it's something that's loosely followed.
Well, it's not. Yeah, I mean, they just say anything. They just say anything. I hear Mike Lee, for example, the senator from Utah. I'm on X, and not to pick on him, but he talks about how Marxism has ruined this country. And somebody who's lived in a Marxist country like I have, to start saying, Marxist, it's just crazy. It's just over the top.
Yeah, it's a bunch of gaslighting, really, isn't it? I mean, just saying, oh, it's here's a little hill, but I'm going to make a mountain out of it.
Yeah. or that, that these communists, there's nobody. Okay, what is communism? Communism is when the government owns the means of production and the means of distribution. That means that Apple, that means that Exxon, that means that IBM, Microsoft, all of these become property of the government. It means Target, Walmart, Chevron, all of these become property. Who is proposing that? Nobody's proposing
No
that.
one.
So why do we say these people are communists? They're not.
And it's really,
Communists.
it's scare tactics, right? To try
It
to get
is.
people away from that other side.
Exactly. But what we've done, we've proposed putting into place ways to hold politicians accountable. And if they lie, there've got to be ramifications. Now, one of the biggest problems in our country right now is the fact that there's no widely trusted source of facts in our country anymore.
That's true.
Why has it become this? Well, back in the old days, it was very hard to start a news organization. If you wanted to start a newspaper, you had to have a printing press, you had to have a journalist, you had to have a way to distribute the newspapers, you had to have an advertising team. It was not simple. And same with a television station. You couldn't just start a television station or network or radio station. But right now, any Joe with a laptop and a web page can start a news site.
Hey, hello.
So,
No. Exactly.
Yeah,
no, you're absolutely right. Because I got the idea of starting a podcast, and I do a news episode every Friday. And you know what? There's nothing regulating me from doing that. I try to be trustworthy and truthful on the news that I report, but who's to say the information where I got it from was incorrect?
Exactly. And so the problem is that because news is just become, it's basically free, that the conventional news model has broken down. That's why so many newspapers have gone out of business, tragically, like in small towns. And so we have to recognize that the traditional model of news no longer works, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, we have to recognize that if you believe the pen is mightier than the sword, and what I believe, that we have to consider our journalism the moral equivalent of our national defense, because our journalism protects us from enemies from both within and without. If we don't have robust journalism, then things become unmoored, like what we have now. That's why we have so much polarization. So we have to get back to making our journalism great again. And one of the ways that we've proposed that is, number one, just like we certify doctors, just like we certify lawyers, we certify truck drivers, we certify database engineers, let's certify journalists and news organizations so that, and we not only certify them, but we also grade them. We evaluate them for certain factors like their neutrality, the seriousness of their articles, or the relevance of their articles, how well they're written, a whole range of things, of variables that will give them a grade, so that, this is a certified news organization and their grade is a B because they tend to be a little skewed in this way, or they don't cite their facts this way. But why do we need certified news organizations and journalists? Because what is going to happen, and what is already happening, is that, suppose, Nathan, I want to make an AI deep fake of you,
Right.
Maybe robbing a jewelry store. And I put that on the website. And how are people going to know if that's true or not? Well, the question will be, was that published on a certified news site, or was it published on Joe Blow's?
Yeah.
Yes. And how do we grade journalists? How do we evaluate them? Well, we want to have sort of a Rotten Tomatoes like model where you have a range of evaluators, both AI based and both human based. You take their average score for the different variables, neutrality, how well written they are, how relevant are the articles, and you give them a grade. And that hopefully will go a long way to helping make our journalism credible. Now, there are going to be some people who, I like to say, if you're going to disbelieve everything, you're liable to believe anything.
Right.
And, there are going to be some people who won't believe anything ever. But if you certify these news sites and you grade them in a neutral way, or in a multifaceted way where you have, it's not just one person evaluating, it's not the government, then hopefully that'll give people a lot more credibility. Now, that doesn't mean that, Joe Blow he can put up stuff and call himself.
Sure, we still have free speech, right?
Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
But they're just not.
But you're saying,
certified.
As far as being a certified news organization. Now, Evan, one of the things I think would be challenging about that would be the same that we, with proposed with the government, is keeping the same people in there. They get power, right, over the certification. So how would you go about, making sure that that didn't happen, that there, personal bias came in, or, political bias, it influences those folks that certify. Now, obviously, I know you said one way is AI, right? Because AI is just going to take data and it's going to, make its own determination based on the data that's available. But a person, right, could have bias.
Well, the thing is, though, is certification. For example, if somebody graduates a university with a degree in journalism, we're automatically going to certify them. Okay. Now that's different from the evaluation from their grade.
Okay.
And if they traditional news organizations, we could give them an automatic certification. But the next part, though, is the most important, the evaluation. If their evaluation, which will be through a combination of AI programs, not just one AI program, and then you'd have maybe even professional evaluators, and you take an average. And if their evaluation falls before, let's say, a C, let's say you have A, B, C, D, F.
Mm-hmm.
If their evaluation falls before a C minus, they get decertified.
I
And
like that.
so, yeah, you get a sort of a default certification if you graduate as a journalist, or if you have a history as being a news
Mm-hmm.
organization. But you can lose that certification if you don't if your grade falls below a certain level. Now, for example,
I mean, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Evan.
let me just say really briefly. One example would be in a news organization. When they have political commentary, do they try to present a range of views, or are they just always providing the left's view or the
Yes.
right's view? Do they have honest debates on their programs between people of different points of view, or is it just a propaganda channel where
Right.
if it's just a propaganda channel, their grade is going to get lower and lower
Lower
and lower, and
until
they
they're
will be
gone. Yep.
decertified, because that's what we want. We want people to be exposed. We don't want propaganda like we have now,
Yeah.
where
So,
it's just people.
and you're not trying to control who could be in the media. What you're trying to say is, we want to certify you so that we know you're a good, credible source. And
Exactly.
through that certification, there's also going to be a review process that's going to have, it's multifaceted, and
Yes.
it'll give you a grade. And, you could move your grade down, you could move it up. But at some point, if you get below a point, you're going to lose your certification. Or at least I would even say, right, Evan, you have the possibility of doing like probation if they hit C, right? You're
Yes,
on a
exactly.
probationary
Yes,
status because you're at a C
exactly.
level now.
Exactly. And the other thing that's critical to this, the other thing that I really want to emphasize, is that we have to recognize, as I say, that real news is no longer a business. Okay, well, let's create a national press fund into which the government contribute, corporations contribute, individuals can contribute, anybody can contribute. And if you get certified as a journalist out of college, you are automatically qualified to receive a stipend each month to start your job. And
Nice.
that and
Well, that actually would promote independent journalists.
Yes, exactly. Because we want the person in Dixonville, Mississippi,
To
who's
report about
graduating journalist,
Dixonville, Mississippi. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
to cover news and to be able to do so without having to do clickbait. They can
Yes.
concentrate on the corruption at City Hall, or they can concentrate on the infrastructure that's deteriorating, or they can on the crime wave that is occurring in this part of town. And so, not only that, if their grade goes up because of the excellence in their reporting, their stipend goes up.
Yeah, I like that.
And so that encourages them to not only get their journalism degree to get certified, but to focus on quality journalism, because they'll get more money. And the same thing with, now some new organizations like the New York Times probably don't need a stipend, okay,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
they're
that's what I
pretty
was going to ask
self-sustained.
you.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but for smaller news organizations in smaller places, or even just kind of independent, a new news organization like the New York Times, but starting up in a different city or competing with the New York Times, they don't have, the money, they don't have the advertising and the history that kind of lets them, will give them something so that they can be self-sustaining, and they don't have to, they're going to be like nonprofit organizations, but they're going to get the money so they can operate, so they can concentrate on facts and highlighting a range of opinions, because that's what we need. But one of the big problems is our news organizations, instead of news, they've gotten into the business of emotion manipulation.
Yep.
And that's
And
because,
clickbait, like you said, clickbait.
yes,
That's
yeah,
one of the things that I first thought about when you said, our news organizations, they might even overblow titles. It's like, you won't
yes,
believe what President Trump did today, or breaking news, and you're like, wait, why is this breaking?
yeah. Well, I like to make an analogy with pro wrestling. Nobody goes to pro wrestling to watch the art of wrestling. They go there to get riled up
Yeah,
and,
it's the
scream at
entertainment.
the breast. Yes, the entertainment. And that's exactly what our news organizations, quote unquote news, our political infotainment. Nobody listens to Fox News to get a range of points of view. They get there to get
It's
riled up.
to yeah, exactly. You're
Nobody goes to MSNBC to hear a range of views. They go there to get riled up and be told
yep.
what they want to
Yeah,
hear.
if you were to
And
tell me, hey, I want you to get me a leftist view, I'd go to MSNBC. If you said I want you to give me a conservative view, I'd go to Fox, right? And that's because that we know those are the two extremes. And then somewhere in the
yes,
middle is where we really want to be.
well, yeah, we want to encourage to, get the emotion manipulation. I mean, look, there are always going to be news, quote unquote, political infotainment channels that are going to focus on emotion manipulation, but they won't
Mm-hmm.
be certified.
Right.
So if somebody gets their news from one of those, the first question is, I heard this story. Oh, was that from a certified news site? No, it wasn't. Okay, well, then it's probably, you should probably have a little doubt about it, because this is probably something that's been published to get you riled up
Yeah,
and not
exactly.
not really. And so that's why we want to have, like I say, certified news organizations and
And
journalists
journalists.
and a pot of money to support them, because, like I
You know,
say,
and
journalism
that
has to
stops
be thought
outside
of.
interest too, right? If you think
Yes,
about that, people that want to push a certain viewpoint and say, hey, I'll give your organization money. If you're like, listen, it's just a national pot and nobody can, I
exactly.
mean, obviously people can buy a company, do whatever they want. We still have capitalism in the country, right? They can make a big news organization, but they want to get it certified. But yeah, you're
And
absolutely
get a
right.
good grade,
Yep.
because what the real kill point is this: unless we as a country have a certain common set of facts that we agree on, then we're going to be unmoored. And
Yes.
number two, our journalism has to be thought of as the moral equivalent of our national defense, as I've said before, because it is what protects us from enemies both within and without, the enemies that want to destroy this great experiment we call democracy. When you think about how nations have been run for the 99.99% of human history, it's been monarchs, kings, emperors, religious leaders, warlords. And democracy is an experiment where you give the power to the people. But there are
Exactly.
forces in this world that want to see that destroyed. They want to
Mm-hmm.
go back to a world where nations are run by small elites or small
Exactly.
groups of elites.
Yep.
And the biggest problem right now is that if democracy fails, these very powerful people, like we see in China, are going to have the technology through surveillance and AI to ensure that democracy never comes back, which is why this is such a critical point in history. We've got to get our house in order when it comes to our democracy and in our country in general.
Yep. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you for that, Evan, because that was actually, you went in the journalism part of it. That was my next topic that I had for you. But now my next one that I want to talk about that I saw on your site was election reform.
Yes.
So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I do. Winston Churchill, he said something really, really interesting. He said the greatest argument against democracy is to, have a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. And this is one of our democracy's spots that needs to be addressed. And that is, right now, how are our elections run? Well, they're run right now. Elections are typically, in any given election, you have a minority of voters. It's not even a majority of voters. And most of those voters are woefully uninformed. Our country is being decided by a minority of voters, the majority of which are, voting based on that attack ad they heard, or that razzle dazzle marketing campaign they
Mm-hmm.
heard, or maybe they're voting just because of one pet issue that they feel strongly about. What we have to do is we have to give incentives. We have to come up with incentives for voters to become informed on the issues and to vote. And what we've proposed is that you have, let's say you have a quiz for each election, and you can take the quiz as many times as you want. And the higher grade you get, you'll be made available a set of goodies, let's say. Like, for example, if you get a certain score, you'll have a whole list of different things that you can choose as like gifts. For example, a free pass to national parks. That's something the government could provide. Or Microsoft or Apple could provide gift cards. Or the restaurant down the street could give a coupon. So the higher your score, the more goodies you can select. And And if you get consistently good scores, you'll be labeled a superstar voter, and other benefits will occur. Like, for example, you get pre-boarding on aircraft, a superstar voter. I think people will respond to incentives, and so we want to give people incentives to learn the issues, not from advertisements, but from an easy to understand summary of the different ideas. And the thing is that if the politicians are really confident about their own ideas, they should want this. They should want the voters to have a clear idea of what they stand for and what their opponent stands for. Not lies, not misinformation,
Yeah.
not wild exaggerations. So the voters, take these quizzes. The higher score they get, the better, the more goodies they can select. If you get a score of 12 and you show that you vote, you get maybe 2 goodies from the list of things you can choose. But if you get higher, the more goodies you can select. And what we want to do is, like I say, encourage our voters to learn the issues through this quiz process and to vote, because they're going to get some goodies. That's just one example. The other thing is that we want to have our children, I think, in school have sort of mock elect where they do something similar, where they're explained the issues, and then you have them debate amongst themselves civilly in a civil manner, and then they vote, quote unquote. And because I think it would be really interesting in a given election, suppose there's a big gap between how the real voters vote and how the children vote. Wouldn't that be interesting to understand
It would
why
be.
our children are voting so much differently
Yeah.
than our adults?
And then are you thinking, so as far as the children, are you thinking like a one-off where they just do it like within their local schools, or actually having
Yes.
ballots for them as well on ballot day?
No, I'm
That's
talking
not
about,
necessarily count, but that
no,
could be okay.
classroom,
Yeah.
in the
So
classroom.
like having good debates about the issues, you
Yes,
to talk back and forth, teachers actually, and if you think about it, that would be great anyway, because it would teach our young folks how to have a respectful debate back and
exactly.
forth.
Yes,
And I mean,
exactly.
I remember doing that in government class in high school,
Yeah,
but that was 12th
right.
grade. And at that
Yes,
point, it's too late. I
yes,
think we need to do a little bit younger, right? And
exactly.
and
We would
start
start
teaching them
early.
earlier. Yep.
Yes, yes, and let them get used to hearing ideas, debating in a civil way, exchanging ideas, and then having them vote. But and developing a passion for learning the issues and for voting from an early age.
Yep. I
And
like that.
like I say, it would be really interesting when there's a discrepancy between how the adult voters are actually voting and how the kids are. Why are the kids voting differently? Let's analyze this. What is it about these issues that mean more to them than they mean to the adults? This would just be really interesting. And so this is what I talk about election reform. We're going to give election reform starting with our politicians, where we're going to hold them accountable if they lie. We're going to have journalism that gives people facts and that's where, instead of propaganda. We're going to have incentives for voters to learn the issues and to vote accordingly. And then we're going to also, start children at an early age to get them passionate about learning the issues and passionate about their point of view and listening to other points of view. And the worst thing is what we're seeing now, where people basically go into these agree fests.
Yeah.
They just these where they're just everybody is agreeing, and I see this all the time on
Yeah. I hate
Twitter.
to agree with you on that, but I do agree.
Yeah, no, but
You're
really,
right.
it's just like it's always a lot of fun, or it's easier to be with people you agree with, but you don't grow in that way.
Right.
It's
You
like
need that adversity to challenge
yes,
yourself.
exactly. You don't become a good boxer by just sitting around with the other boxers drinking a beer.
Exactly.
You don't become a good soldier by sitting in the barracks all day and playing video games. You got to get out there and grapple with this stuff, but do so giving the people you're talking with the benefit of the doubt. In terms of these are good people too. They've got their ideas. I'm interested in your ideas. These are my ideas. Let's talk about it, and we might agree to disagree,
Yeah.
but that's
And that's
okay.
fine.
Yeah,
Exactly. I'm with you. If we come to the at the end of the day and we say, "Hey, we'll just agree to disagree," that's okay, because guess what? We still got more in common than that one
exactly.
disagreement.
Yeah, yeah. The thing is what's so interesting, or what's so astounding, is that we really all want the same thing.
We
We
do.
all want a prosperous, opportunity-rich economy. We want a government that works. We want that ensures our freedom. And for me, I can tell you this: the thing that really, in my different travels, what really has disturbed me more than anything is to see the astounding waste of human talent all over the world, including in this country. There is no greater resource that's being squandered than human talent. It just breaks my heart, really, to see kids who are born into situations where they'll never be able to achieve their potential, or people who've never had the chance to really achieve their potential and live the life the way they want. And we can work toward a world, we're not a utopia, but where everybody is given the opportunity the tools will be made available to them to achieve their potential. They might choose not to take advantage of those tools, but they will always be available. And that means investing in our educational infrastructure and having a dynamic, opportunity creating economy, which we can do if we get special interests and career politicians out of the picture.
Exactly. And Evan, if it's okay, I want to move on to, I know we talked about this a little bit already, but it's part of your, the party, but the lifetime limit on political parties. And I know we touched on it briefly, but can you explain the idea of disbanding the political parties every 12 years? And is there a reason that you picked 12 years, or did that seem to be, to actually get stuff done? Did that feel like a good amount of time to let the party go on?
Yeah, that seemed like, that it's not like I'm thinking that has to be hard.
Yeah. But it's just, it was a good idea. And I mean, it makes sense to me because if you think about it, with all the different offices that we have, that gives you a good spectrum to cover a good many of them.
Yeah. And so the idea is we want to have the best of both worlds. We want to have our political parties be vehicles through which people of similar values, of ideas, can organize and present candidates accordingly, endorse ballot measures accordingly. But we don't want to have them become tribal. And the only way to do that is to disband them after 12 years, because right now it's just ridiculous. People will say, I'll never vote. I mean, people literally told me I could never let my daughter marry a Democrat, or vice versa. It's just crazy.
It is.
And there's no attempt to listen to the other side. And for some reason, in a lot of ways, for good reason, because the politicians are not really talking about ideas. They're talking about, it's a lot of emotion manipulation.
It is. You hear a lot of, we've got to go against this person and we got to go against that person, where I'm the type of person, I'm like, I want you to quit going against a person and tell me what you're going to do for the people.
Yes. Just tell us what your ideas are.
Yeah.
It's that simple. Tell us and do so in a way where you're not concerned about reelection, or you're not concerned about a political career. Just tell us what your ideas. So anyway, we want to take the tribalization out of our political parties. And the only way to do that, because every organization, as I was saying, in any organization becomes institutionalized sooner or later. It's like you could think of even the Pentagon, that's more of an employment agency than it is, or a money burning agency.
Definitely money burning.
Yeah. It's, it's,
I mean, they haven't passed an audit yet, right?
Exactly.
So
yeah. Why do we tolerate this? Every dollar.
I say all these regulations that the government puts on businesses to keep good books and, have good accounting and make sure that they can account for every single dime they have. And then we find out they're writing checks and not even putting what it was written for.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you send blank checks to any bureaucracy, what are they going to do?
Burn through
it. It's going to be it's going to be a money feeding frenzy, money consuming feeding frenzy. Why, the thing is, though, is that there's this idea that that sending money to the Pentagon means strong defense, and it's not that way at all, because every dollar has to be thought of as a precious national resource, because every dollar you waste is a dollar that could have been used to pay down the national debt. It's a dollar that could have been invested in infrastructure, educational infrastructure, energy infrastructure. It's a dollar that could have been used for a tax cut. So every dollar has to be thought of as a precious national resource, and wasting money has to be thought of as a way of treason. Actually,
yeah,
I mean, maybe
I agree with you. Yeah, if we might have to make it that harsh, right? Because obviously they're not getting the they're not getting the message that we don't want them spending our money on things that we don't even spend for on our own people here.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just looking at some of the stuff that has been brought out in the media and things lately, and some of the money we've sent to foreign companies. Or foreign countries, sorry. And it's like, we're spending, X amount of dollars for, I think what was one of them? It was for I think a transgender play in Ireland, is a few $1 million. And I'm like, we don't even spend that money here for transgender
Right.
play, so why are we sending it to other places?
Yeah.
And it's,
Yeah, well, specifically with the Pentagon, when we keep unneeded military bases open,
yeah.
if we're
Well,
going to close, let's say we'll close this military base, but we're going to invest money so that the community won't,
yeah,
wither up and die.
falter. Exactly.
Yeah. And or this unneeded weapons program that not even the Pentagon wants. Why are we doing? And then for the things that we do need, well, let's have the Pentagon working with independent, experts, declare a war on waste, where every dollar will be accounted for.
Exactly.
Every dollar will be, and we're going to have them take this war on waste with the same seriousness they would with any war. Because if they're wasting money, that debilitates us.
Yes.
That debilitates us. Money has to be used efficiently, and it has to be used in a way where we're getting literally the biggest bang for the buck.
Yep.
And
And
so
I even go a bit further to say, not only does it have to be used correctly, but I think we need to track every single penny that we
exactly,
give our
yes,
government, and they should be able
yeah,
to account for all of it.
exactly,
And with the
no
amount
more
of money we
black
give them,
box.
there's no reason that they shouldn't be able to account. We give them so
Well,
much money that they could bring in an outside firm,
yeah,
to do
well,
it. But
no, that's the thing. Nobody has ever lost, or very few people ever lost the reelection campaign by proposing to cut,
yeah,
or
exactly.
by saying, that they're going to, if they say they're going to send more money to the Pentagon, that's likely to win them reelection,
Yeah, exactly.
and both parties, by the way. But
Yes.
anyway, so
Oh yeah,
the
I
idea,
definitely see that, and that's why I say our duopoly, or our two-party system. I don't think it was ever intended to be this way, and it's definitely, we've seen its usefulness go by the wayside, I think, at
yeah.
this point.
So let's get rid of our conventional political parties. Let's start a process where political parties come and they exist for 12 years, let's say, and then they have to be disbanded. And maybe 3 years before they're disbanded, people will start to form new political parties. And we'll call them government. The government recognized political parties are ones that have a certain minimum number of members.
Mm-hmm.
And so after 12 years, these new political parties with new leadership will appear. Now, what some people will say, well, won't they just be carbon copies of the old one? I don't believe so, because if you're going to start a new political party, who's going to want to say, oh, we're going to be exactly like these guys? You're
Mm-hmm.
going to want to propose new ideas, get people excited about what you're proposing, and not just say, well, we're going to be just a continuation of the last guy. So I think that will go a long way to removing the tribalism behind what we see now, the mindless, let me say mindless tribalism we see now. So that's your answer to the question. Let's try to get the best of both worlds, where political parties exist to allow people to organize, but where they will not and cannot become just mindlessly tribal.
Yes. Yeah. And I think even if you were to do a copy and paste, the one thing that, you suggested earlier was the new party cannot have leadership from the old party. So even
Exactly.
if it was a
Exactly.
copy and paste, there's still going to be new leadership that, obviously, if you're put at the top of a party, regardless of how you got there, right, you're going to hopefully put your own ideas out there.
Exactly. Yeah, I just can't imagine. I mean, that anybody would, would just say, well, we're going to do exactly, because you're not thinking. If you're just going to be,
Yeah,
you're just,
exactly. Exactly.
you could have been a chimp in charge of it, if they're going to do
Exactly.
exactly,
Yeah.
and so you're going to people are going to get excited when they hear new ideas, when they see fresh blood coming in, and people who are excited and passionate,
Yep.
but who aren't going to go tribal.
Yeah. Exactly. And then, so Evan, on, all these ideas, I think, have great principle behind them. I think you put some good thought behind them, but obviously people are going to criticize, and there might be some challenges.
Of
So
course there will be.
what do you think, what are some criticisms or challenges that the Solutions Party might face in implementing these ideas?
Okay, well, let's think about who we're taking on here. We're taking on career politicians. We're taking on the entrenched political parties. We're taking on the special interests that are in bed with those two.
Mm-hmm.
We're taking on the infotainment news channels. We're taking on, we propose how to end the drug war. So we're taking on the drug cartels. We're talking about envisioning a world with no autocrats, which we can do, just like Ronald Reagan, talked about putting communism of the ashes of
Yep.
history. When he said that, people laughed. People thought, what are you smoking? And within 10 years, the Soviet Union collapsed. And so we're taking on incredibly powerful forces here. If we say Right now, we want to get rid of career politicians. We want to get rid of the Democrat-Republican Party. That will unite the Republicans and Democrats more than anything. All of the politicians, career politicians, will come up and say, no, 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 we got. So I'm anticipating a lot of vicious resistance to this by the forces, the quote unquote powerful. As Tim Boucher, the representative from Tennessee, said in an NPR interview once, he said, Washington, to paraphrase, is all about keeping the powerful in power. And so this is about taking the powerful out of power and giving the power back to the people. And so those very powerful forces, the entrenched political parties, the career politicians, the special interests that are working with both because that supports their business model, the entertainment news channels, they're not going to like the idea of certification.
Of course
they like
not.
the way it is. Autocrats, because we want to work toward a world with no autocrats.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to tell a little bit about that in a bit, but we're taking on incredibly powerful forces and they're going to fight back viciously. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. But the thing is that I believe that people are sick and tired of what they're seeing. They're sick and tired of how things are. They're sick and tired of the fact they're just scraping by, paycheck to paycheck. They're sick and tired of the fact you can't send a kid to college anymore unless you're a multimillionaire.
My gosh,
even
yeah.
a millionaire. Millionaire is not even enough anymore. Multimillionaire. Who can pay rent anymore? Who can buy a house anymore? All of these things. If you want to destroy democracy, one of the ways to do it is to make people believe the pursuit of happiness is no longer
gone.
possible.
Yep.
And so I think people are sick of what they're seeing. And this is why the Democratic Party is so unpopular. The Republican Party too. People are sick of it. And so I believe that once people get into, understand what these ideas are about, this is not about right or left. This is about getting back to what our democracy should be, a healthy competition of ideas, that people will buy into this. And if the people buy into this, these power structures that we're talking about will crumble because the people still hold the power.
They do. We still hold the power at the polls.
Yes, we still have the power. And if the people get behind this, then nothing will stop it. And I believe that people will buy into these ideas because I think they recognize that things aren't functioning. They recognize that our politicians' first priority is power. They recognize that our political parties are completely tribal. They recognize that special interests, if you don't believe this, just look at the tax code,
yeah,
are calling the shots. And they recognize, I don't know about you, but I'm sick of culture wars. Always,
yes.
We disagree.
I mean, we're just so polarized in everything.
But our disagreements don't have to be tribal.
No.
They shouldn't be tribal.
No.
And, in a democracy, we're going to disagree, but, the democracy is all about handling disagreements in a way that, you have to compromise.
Yep. Find common ground. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. And if your ideas are really the right ones, over time, they will eventually win. If you have real confidence in your ideas, then you have nothing to worry about from a robust democracy. Because the people will eventually agree with you if your ideas are fundamentally the right ones. But let the people decide. Let them hear the 2 or 3 or whatever ideas. Let's vote on them. Let's move forward.
Yep. And I think that's what we're really missing in this country, because when we come to elections nowadays, most of the time we're saying, all right, which of these candidates is the less evil, instead of saying, hey, I've got 4 candidates to choose from, now I can actually make a vote that makes a difference, as opposed to, okay, these are my only 2 choices. I mean, we have the Green Party and independents and stuff like that, but they're not, like you said, as long as we still have the 2 big parties, those other parties are never going to make any leeway.
Yeah, but the other thing though is, let's just face it, our politicians, let's say we have 2 choices, but are they even coming remotely close to telling us the truth? Are they really providing us with exciting ideas for us to debate and to contemplate? It's just it really is devolved. It's devolved into a circus of emotion manipulation and lies, because that's what wins elections. And we want to get away from that. We don't want any more emotion manipulation and lies in an election. We want elections based on facts, based on ideas, and based on vision, presented in a civil way, debated in a civil way, and voted upon in a civil way.
Yep, totally agree with you, Evan, on that, because you're absolutely right. We want truthful things. We want to know what's going on in our country. We don't want to hear people bashing each other back and forth when that's all we hear. We
Yeah.
want solutions. Hey, a solution party, right?
Yes,
We want
exactly.
solution. We want to see our government start working for us again, because as of
Yes.
right now, I mean, the last what, probably 16 years, they really haven't done anything, to
Yeah.
make any headway to make the lives of Americans better. They really haven't done anything.
And you know who's celebrating this are the world's autocracies. The world, autocracy is becoming more and more, it's winning the war for the future right now because more countries are going autocratic. And that's an absolute tragedy because the way it is now, as we're saying, if a democracy collapses, the autocrats will have the technology, just like they have in China, to ensure that democracy never returns. So this is a real critical time in history. It's a time where we need to get our house in order. And if we get our house in order, the prosperity will come. That freedom and prosperity gap will inspire others to follow our example, will change the world through the power of our example, not the example of our power, but the power of
Power
our
of our
example.
example. Yep.
And the autocracies, which are wretched forms of government run by paranoid, weak leaders. They're not strong. They call them strongmen, but they're weak because they have to use the tools of government to stay in power. They will be crushed. And then we can have a world, and I'm not talking about utopia here, but we'll have a world where if we have democracies, then we can concentrate on making technology work for us because right now technology is a double-edged sword.
So
It's
yeah, so
used.
much.
Yes, it's, why is it a double-edged sword? It can make our lives better, but it can be used or abused by the greedy to oppress and to exploit. And that's what we see in China and other places where they're
Yes.
using these new technologies to oppress people, to keep them under their thumb. And we want technology on a short leash so that it improves everybody's lives, so that we're working less. We have more time for family, more time to learn things, more time to work out, time to make that home cooked meal. This is
Exactly.
what technology should be to make our lives easier, working less, having more quality of life.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
but one of the things to make that happen is we got to get the autocracies out of the picture, let's say, because autocracies will always use technology in negative ways.
Yeah.
And as a matter of
For
fact,
the, as I like to say, the unintended purposes.
yeah, well, actually in Scientific America, there was an article not too long ago about how it won't be too long before they'll have technology to read thoughts.
Yeah.
Now that could be great for analyzing mental illness or whatever, but you can
You could
take it
see
to the
how that could
bank.
go bad.
Yes, that the autocrats, the despots, will use that to further control people, further keep them under their. And if they can start reading thoughts, eventually they'll get to the point where they can actually control thoughts.
Yeah. Because if you could
And
read it,
so,
right, you could write
yes,
it.
yes, eventually it'll get to that point, and that'll be a priority of the people who want to control the masses. And so this is why this is such a critical time in history, because technology can be used for the most unimaginably horrible reasons possible if it's being controlled by people who are have way too much power.
Yeah. And so I would almost say, Evan, that the solutions party, as you see it, is probably, and hopefully I'm not putting words in your mouth, but an operation or a way to not only save America, but try to save and promote democracy around the world.
Yes. Yes, because like I said, one of the things that really bothers me tremendously is to see so many people who've never had the chance to develop their talents. And, a wasted mind, a wasted talent should be thought of as a tragedy for all of us because you never know what you're losing. You could be losing a great scientist, a great doctor, a great artist. And we want to have everybody have the opportunity. One of the things that we have to do is, we have to work toward a world where people can determine how they want their nation run. And I'll tell you this, I don't actually have a problem with a country if the people select a communist government or a theocracy. If they hear the different ideas and they select a communist government, well, that's fine. But
That's
what
their
is
choice.
key,
Yeah.
what the key is that they have retained the power to remove that government through a free, fair, and peaceful election.
And I think we know that we've seen that some of those elections, right, that happened. I think, what was it in China? Did they elect the Communist Party in China? Is that how that works?
No, the average person does not have any vote in China, North Korea. It's like in Iraq when they would vote for Saddam Hussein. He'd get 100% of the vote.
Right.
It wasn't. I mean, it would joke elections. They're like trying to give some semblance of legitimacy,
but it's not really. Yeah,
no.
But behind the scenes, it's like no, they're not really getting a vote.
But the key is that the people retain the power always, whatever their government they choose, to remove that government through free, fair, and peaceful elections. If they want to have a theocracy, okay, that's their choice. But if they don't like how that theocracy is managing things,
then they should have the right to. Yep.
Yes, in ways where the theocracy never has too much power to control the elections, like they do now, like in Iran or in Afghanistan, or like in Russia with Putin, killing political opponents.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of hard to lose an election when your opponents always mysteriously die.
Yeah, die or end up in jail.
Exactly.
Or just downright rigging the elections, like in Venezuela.
Yeah.
Where he loses, but they magically make it, a 53-47 victory.
Yeah, exactly.
Such a joke.
Yep.
But this comes back to the addiction of power. I knew Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela would never give up power.
Right.
And because the Syrian dictator never would have given, North Korea will never give up power. But like I say, I believe that just as the Soviet Union collapsed, if the world's democracies are free, ever freer, and ever more prosperous, that prosperity and freedom gap will become so great that the autocracies will collapse, because the autocracies can't compete with us.
Yeah, because once the world starts seeing other countries go the way of democracy and see the freedom that they have and the opportunities that they have, they're going to want that themselves.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So, we talk about, ending the drug war. We talk about making immigration and refugee crisis work for us. We talk about judicial reform, a whole bunch of different things. And we're going to put some more articles. But, these are just ideas. And politics in a democracy should never be about a person. It should always be about the ideas.
Yes.
Let's never put a person on a pedestal. Let's put the ideas and the vision and the ideals on the pedestal.
I agree with that.
The good thing about that is it doesn't depend on any one person to come, quote unquote, save us.
Exactly. So, Evan, I know we're getting close to our time, but I want to ask you, can you paint a picture of what America would look like if these changes that you propose are in place? Yes. For one thing, we would have a democracy based on not any more emotion manipulation and lies, but a healthy exchange of ideas. We would have journalism that the vast majority of the people could trust, because it's let's just say that they could trust and they could rely on. We could have a common set of facts. We would have a drug war that is ended. And we can put an end to the drug war very quickly, as I have proposed. So we could talk about this on another occasion. I'm happy to talk about that. I would like to see our judiciary, for example, get the politics out of the nomination process. Mm-hmm. Let's have our judges really be respected and thought of as independent, so that when the Supreme Court makes a 5-4 decision, it's not Republican nominees on one versus
side
Democrats.
Yeah, it's just because there's no credibility. You think of it, the judiciary is just basically an extension of the political parties, which is exactly what we don't want. I would like to see a country where we have an economy that's based on unlimited energy and an adaptive and creative workforce. Because if you have unlimited energy, the physics definition is the ability to do work. If we have unlimited energy at our disposal, and we have unlimited energy, by the way, right now, here today, we just need to exploit it. You combine that with a creative and adaptive workforce, you have the foundation for an opportunity-rich economy, because then you can solve all sorts of problems. Like, for example, one is just water desalination. We can end droughts forever. No more droughts. We don't have to tap the aquifers. We can create cities in the desert with unlimited water. And just that alone could be revolutionary. And so I would like to see, these things I'm saying, drug war ended, immigration working for us, not being used by a tool by the tyrants to weaken our democracy like it is now. There's a reason why Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro and Daniel Ortega are sending hundreds of thousands of refugees out of their country, because they destabilize this country. They destabilize the democracies. It's a weapon being used against us. We can turn that around and make it as a weapon or something against the autocracy, and at the same time helping people who are fleeing tyranny, corruption, poverty, and violence.
Right. Yeah.
This is the vision that I have, but it all is based on not right or left. It's based on a competition of ideas. This is not about left or right. It's about everything. We want to take advantage of our strongest point, which is our diversity of our ideas. Let's get these ideas flowing. Let's hear them expressed honestly, and let's vote on them. And let's finally, really, when this all comes down to it, it's really about breaking up power, making sure that power can never be over-concentrated in the coalition of career politicians and special interests and fake, political infotainment channels.
Yeah. And you know what? There's everything that you said here today. I think every reasonable American or a reasonable voter would say these are things that I've been talking about for a long time.
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
Term limits, that's in there. One term and you got to wait 2 years. Love it, because then you can't start this, power grab for years over years. You're talking about, our election reforms and how we do our parties and making sure that they're not in power too long. And, really in the end of it, to me, what I'm hearing is let's give the power back to the people.
Exactly. That's it. It's the fate of humankind will be decided by we, the people. And if we, the people, give it to these very small group of people, despots, theocracies, we're never going to recover it again, because the technology is now in place to ensure it never comes back. And so this is why this is a critical time. We want the power in the hands of the people, and we want our politicians there temporarily working for the people, for the benefit of all of us, to make our economy ever more prosperous and to make our country ever freer. And we want people to want to come to America, the best, most talented people.
Absolutely.
But we also want to help those who are fleeing tyranny and horrific violence. Right now, the despots can say, well, look how America and Europe are treating these desperate people. They're no better than us. Let's show a different example and make it work for us. So we can do that. We can do that if we get the out of control culture war politics out of the picture.
I totally agree, Evan. Excellent. So Evan, sorry, let me just here. What else? Anything else that you want our listeners to hear from this episode?
Well, I would really enjoy if people would go to the website, solutionsparty.org, share ideas. There's an email there if you have any ideas. We're all about ideas. This is not us saying this is how it's going to be. We're all about ideas. If these ideas can be improved upon, hey, we're all ears. This is not about pride. It's not about ego. This is about ideas. So yeah, if they could go to that. We're also on X, the former Twitter. It's @_solutions party. If you could start following us, because we post daily. We're going to start doing video casts too.
Oh, nice.
And try to go into multiple social media outlets, try to spread the word, because I just believe that as we're talking that, once people buy into these ideas and improve upon them, hopefully.
Yeah, you're really welcoming
really
people
change.
To say, hey, these are some of the ideas that we started with. This is our baseline, but let's improve upon it together.
Exactly. Yes. This isn't about, as I say, this isn't about me. This isn't about anybody in particular. These are about the ideas. Let's put the ideas on the pedestal. Let's improve upon them. Let's debate them. Let's vote upon them, and let's move forward and get the greed, the political greed and the special interest greed out of the picture, and things will work. Things will work.
So Evan, I know it's called the Solutions Party, but it almost seems like it might be better fitted to be called a Solutions Movement.
Well, that might be a bad idea. I've thought about that. I debated that too, because one of the things I want to emphasize is that when I say 12-year limit on the party, that applies to us too. Now, we're not officially a party yet, but we hope to get established, first of all, in Oregon, and then elsewhere. If we could get other people, in this and start a solution, a real. But in order to be, if you're going to be a candidate at the Solution Party, you got to promise that you're only going to serve one term and you're not going to vote. You're not going to seek another office. You've got to,
really the way it should be.
Yes, exactly. Now, you might have different ideas about political parties. You might have different ideas about how to do the drug war. You might have different ideas about how to make the economy prosperous. That's great. But the first and most fundamental thing is you're going to get into office and you promise to never run for re-election. Or if you're going to run for another office, you wait for 2 years.
Wait your 2 years.
For a different a different office, never the same office. Because
Yeah,
if
I
you're going to
love
run for
that.
the same, if you're going to run for the same office again, what they're going to do is they're going to try to skew things
Yep.
to set them up for their next run at that same
Exactly.
office.
Yep, exactly. Hey, I'm going to pass this bill so that it spans 2 years so that I can come back and do it again.
Exactly. Yes.
Yep.
That's going to be their priority. And so, okay, you're never going to get back to that
Yeah, I
office
love that.
again.
So if you serve your, 2, or like we said, maybe we make it a 3-year term in Congress, and now you're out. You got 2 years. You could sit and think about what you want to do next, right? Or maybe help your party out, right? Because you have that option too.
Right.
And then you could say, you know what? In 2 years, all right, I've done Congress. I'm going to go for Senate now.
Exactly.
Or you know what? I'm going to stay local. I'm going to run for local state Senate or whatever.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yes, exactly. When I say 12-year limit on once we're established, that's going to apply for us too. It's like, well, I'm in favor of 12-year limit on political parties, except for our political party.
Exactly. We're the exception. Yeah, that wouldn't look too good, would it?
Yeah, or I'm going to run for office. I'm against reelection, except when it comes to my own reelection.
Yeah, good for thee, but not for me.
Well, it's like Marco Rubio. He proposed putting a term limit on senators, and when that was rejected, the first thing he did was run for reelection. And I say, if you're going to propose something, you got to be prepared to walk the walk and talk the talk.
And I think that's the problem we see with our politicians now is they throw out ideas but never follow it up with actual action.
Yeah, it's just more of a publicity stunt.
Yeah, or like they say, oh, we're not going to let Congress members trade stocks as they're sitting there trading stocks while they're writing it up.
Yeah, or they're or what do you call it, cryptocurrency?
Yeah, exactly. But
yeah, and this is another thing, like you said. How is it that somebody who's earning $150,000 a year is worth $50 million?
Yeah, and they've only earned that for 4 years. So you're like, what?
Yeah, this is something actually, we talk about a war on corruption. I know people are sick of war on this, war on that. But from what I've seen is corruption is such a worldwide cancer that I think that people around the world, because this has to be actually a multinational effort, because corruption in any part of the world is a threat to, freedom and prosperity in any other part of the world. Like in Peru, people are so sick of the corruption, the revolving door of corruption, that they're starting to listen to, potential strongmen, the guys who say, oh yeah, you give me all the power, I'll get rid of the corruption. But you know what? Once they're in power,
they're going to start
even more corrupt.
A whole new type of corruption you didn't even think about.
Yeah. I mean, it's like in Iran. It's like in Iran. They got rid of the Shah and they brought in the Ayatollah.
Yep.
And they're even worse than the Shah.
Exactly. And we keep seeing that. And it's like, you would think that people would say something, but I don't know. Again, maybe it's education too.
Well, also people get so desperate and so fed up because the system isn't working. Politicians, every election, these, if some politicians retire and new ones come in, the first thing they do is they try to get, kickbacks, and they, like in Peru in particular, it's a country that should be so wealthy, but it's so poor because the politicians have this attitude of 90 for me, 10 for the public, 90 for me, 10 for the public. And, corruption is a worldwide cancer that exists in this country too.
It does.
Gerrymandering, for example, is a form of corruption.
Absolutely.
It's just, it's sickening, when our politicians are selecting their voters as opposed to the other way around.
The voters selecting the politicians.
Yes. Yeah, it's sickening. And so we got to get rid of, this is what this is all about.
Yep.
So.
Awesome. Well, Evan, I want to thank you really for joining me. This was so eye-opening, and not going, I've read the website and everything, and I thought it was great, and I was glad to have you on here because I think these are topics that I think the normal everyday person, that's what I talk about, that we think about. Hey, we're tired of the fighting, we're tired of the infighting, and in our politics, we need something. We always say, oh, maybe this person will do it or maybe that person will do it. But I think you're right. We're at the point where we need to change how our political system works.
Yes. It's never about a person. Yes. It's never about a person. That's the key. It's about ideas. It's never about a person. Any politician who says, I'm the only one who can fix it, never believe them. Never believe them. Because that is, honestly, that's what Hugo Chavez in Venezuela said.
Yep.
This is what people who want power will say.
But they'll do anything to get into power. And then it's a totally different story.
Yep. It's about the ideas. And so, this is what I'm hoping that we'll get more and more people into this, because I think that once this builds momentum, it'll be unstoppable, and we'll crush, for lack of a better word, the alliance of corrupt career politicians and their special interest allies. And we won't be, by the way, vulnerable to the foreign trolls that are going in and stoking emotions on purpose and making
Exactly. No, I love it, Evan. Everything I think we could get behind, and it's solutionsparty.org. Is that correct? So yeah, make sure go check out the website. There's a ton of information on there. Evan's information, as well as the solutionsparty.org website, and his X account will also be on justadudepodcast.com. Evan, you'll have a guest page there. So we'll have all your links there for you. So people can click on either site. They can go directly to yours, or if they forget, they can go to justadudepodcast.com, look for Evan, and you can get all of his information there as well. So,
well, Nathan, this has been a true honor, and I hope we can do it again sometime soon. We have a lot of things to talk about.
We do. I think there's so many things that we just talked about the tip of the iceberg, and there's a lot more I think we could talk about, and I think that the audience would be interested in. So I'd definitely love to have you back on again, Evan, to hear some more ideas and to talk through some things.
That would be wonderful. I look forward to it. But let's stay in touch.
Yes.
And I'll send you some other things that you might find interesting later today or tomorrow. And if at some point we'd like to talk about those again, let's do so.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much, Evan. I do appreciate it. Well, that wraps up an eye-opening journey into the world of the Solutions Party with Evan Jaqua. We've talked about no reelection, election reform, and a whole new way of thinking about politics in America. A big thank you to Evan for shedding light on these innovative ideas. Remember, if you want to learn more about the Solutions Party or get involved, check out their website at solutionsparty.org. And as always, I want to hear from you. What did you think about today's discussion? Drop your thoughts in the comments or reach out on social media. We're on all major platforms. Thanks again for hanging out with Just a Dude podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear these fresh perspectives. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and stay just a dude or a dudette. Catch you later.